I used to think I'd seen everything in my years as a forest ranger. Poachers, trapped deer, nights when wildfires painted the sky red until even the stars seemed to burn. But that morning nothing could have prepared me for what waited ahead. The air was thick with fog. No wind, no birds, only the damp scent of soil and the crunch of old tires grinding through mud. I was driving down the dirt road into Bridger Teton Reserve, the same road I'd traveled 1,000 times over the past 27 years. Then I heard it. A sound so strange it made my heart stop for a beat. Not the cry of a wild animal, not the chirp of a fledgling bird, but a hoarse, broken scream, faint, desperate, like it was rising from beneath the ground. I eased off the gas, killed the engine, and in that heavy silence the sound came again. Not loud, but sharp enough to claw straight through me. I stepped out of the truck, my boots sinking into cold mud. Last night's rain had turned the forest floor into soup, thick and sour. I followed the sound through a tangle of ferns, pushing branches aside, and then I saw it. In a pit, nearly 8 feet deep, a tiny Doberman puppy was sinking. It was so small it could have been mistaken for a wild hare. Its black and tan fur was matted with mud ribs standing out like thin white bars beneath its skin. Its eyes were wide and cloudy, but inside them flickered the faintest spark of life, fragile as a dying firefly. I froze. I didn't know who could have done something like this, dig a hole in the middle of the forest and throw a living creature inside, but I could feel my blood boil. Dear God, who could be this cruel? My voice carried through the trees. No answer, only the wet sucking of mud as that small body tried to struggle one last time. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the pit. "Hey, can you hear me? I'm here, buddy. Hold on. Don't give up." One ear twitched barely, but it was enough to split my heart open. Another wave of mud surged, rising to its neck. I reached out, but it was too far. I called rescue over the radio, but all I heard was static. No signal. The fog hung thick that morning, and it felt like the whole forest was working against me. I looked around, just a few broken planks, some rusted stakes, and a shovel. Nothing that could save him unless I went down there myself. I took a breath so deep it burned my lungs, and in that instant when our eyes met, I was dragged backward 10 years into the past. 10 years ago, during a landslide near Wind River, I hadn't pulled my wife out in time. I still remembered her eyes, fearful, pleading, trusting, just like his now. Another life, small and helpless, staring up through the dirt, waiting for me. "No, not again," I whispered, clenching my fists. "I'm not losing anyone else. You hear me?" I tore off my jacket, hooked it over a branch, and grabbed the rescue rope from the truck. No time to think, no plan, only instinct. I drove the anchor into the nearest tree and tied the rope around my waist. My gloves were soaked freezing through, but my hands shook not from cold, rather from fury and compassion tangled into one. "Hold on, kid. I'm coming for you." A faint whimper answered barely a sound at all. I edged closer to the rim. The mud shifted beneath me. One wrong move and I'd be down there with him. But I didn't care anymore. Right then I understood sometimes the weakest lives remind us that our hearts still work. I leaned in closer, looked straight into those fading eyes and whispered, "If you make it through today, kid, I swear I'll believe in miracles again." Then I began to climb down. If you've ever seen a creature abandoned on the roadside in the rain or sinking into the earth, you'll know this feeling. Stay with me till the end of this story, because not every rescuer is strong, and sometimes it's the fragile ones who end up saving us. I've walked this forest 1,000 times in my life, but never, never had I heard it this silent. No birds, no wind, just the smell of mud, the taste of iron in the air, and the pounding of my own heart echoing in my chest. The pit before me was as deep as a well. The ground around it had caved in slick and treacherous. Last night's rain had turned it into a death trap, one born from human neglect carved out during land work and left to rot. And now a small creature was paying the price for that carelessness. The puppy Rook. I'd already started calling him that in my head. He was still alive, but barely. His throat fluttered, releasing wet broken sounds like the fading breath of something on the edge of surrender. I knew I didn't have much time. I grabbed the radio, hoping the signal could cut through the thick mountain fog. "Base, this is Rowe. I need emergency assistance at coordinates of 46.21 North Static tore through the line." Then, silence. I exhaled. Alone again. Just me and the forest. Only this time there was another heartbeat, one trembling between life and death. I opened the truck bed and pulled out what little I had: a few wooden planks for crossing mud, a coil of rescue rope, and an old flashlight. Not enough. But I'd learned long ago that in the wild enough didn't matter, only that you didn't stand still. I laid the planks into a makeshift bridge. Each nail I hammered felt heavier than the last. The hole swallowed sound itself. Even the strikes of the hammer vanished into it. Kneeling at the rim, I peered down. Rook was less than 2 feet from the bottom now. Mud had risen to his shoulders. Those cloudy brown eyes looked up at me again, tired, dim, but still carrying something I couldn't name. Trust. I don't know why that look made my throat tighten. Maybe because I saw myself in it, the man who'd let go too soon all those years ago during the landslide. "Not again," I whispered. "Not today." I looped the rescue rope around my waist and secured the other end to the nearest tree. When I tested it, the line stretched and squeaked a short, nervous sound. Strong enough to hold me, but not by much. I slid onto the plank, one foot balancing the other, feeling for solid ground inch by inch. Cold. Deep. Thick as cement. The mud gripped my legs like it wanted to claim me too. A soft shift to my right made my pulse spike. I froze. No sudden moves. One wrong shift and we'd both go under. "Easy, Ethan," I muttered to myself. "You've handled worse." I bent low, stretching my arm toward Rook. The distance was only a hand's width, but it felt like a mile. He lifted his head muzzle, trembling eyes wide. "That's it, kid. Just a little closer." A gust of wind swept through, and then came the crack. Short, sharp, terrifying. The plank beneath me split. I stopped breathing. My body went rigid, sweat cold against my spine. I counted in my head. 1, 2, 3. Then shifted my weight to my left knee, keeping the board steady. Slowly, I reached out again. My hand brushed the matted fur of Rook's neck, cold, slick, almost lifeless. "Hold on, you hear me? I'm pulling you out." I gripped gently but firmly, trying to lift. The mud fought back, clinging to him like something jealous and alive. Each pull came with a wet groan from the earth and a faint cry from him. I stopped, heart pounding. Pull harder, and I'd snap his neck. Let go, and he'd sink. That's when I realized I wasn't fighting mud. I was fighting time. An idea flashed. I grabbed the small knife from my pocket, sliced the rescue rope in half, and tied a loop around Rook's body. I hooked the other end to a steel stake, then began to pull slowly, steadily. This time, the mud yielded. Inch by inch, his frail body lifted free. His face was streaked with sludge, his tiny nose quivering. A weak breath escaped him, and that was all the strength I needed to keep going. Good. Good boy, just a bit more. When I'd managed to free half his body, the plank gave another deafening crack. I lunged backward, dragging him with me. We tumbled hard onto the edge of the pit. Mud exploded around us, cold as ice against my skin. Rook lay still in my arms, breathing ragged, weak, but alive. I rested his head in the crook of my arm. His chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. A long breath left my lips, half relief, half terror. Around us, the forest stayed gray and mute, as if holding its breath. Only 2 heartbeats echoed in that silence, his and mine. In that moment, out there in the desolate wild, it felt like we were the only two souls left in the world. "It's okay, kid," I murmured, my voice raw. "I've got you now." I don't know if he understood, but when those eyes finally closed, I swear he believed me. I dropped to my knees at the edge of the pit, gasping for air. My clothes were soaked through my hands, numb from the cold. Rook lay sprawled on the ground, half his tiny body freed from the mud, the other half still trapped, held tight like a curse that refused to let go. I knew he was alive, but barely. Every breath he took was a battle. A cold wind swept through, carrying the smell of wet earth and the echoing pulse of the forest like the slow heartbeat of something ancient and alive. I looked around towering pines stretching into the mist, no signs of life anywhere. No engines, no rescue, no hope beyond what I could make with my own hands. Or, more precisely, my own decision. "All right, kid," I whispered. "We're gonna do this the dumbest way possible." I untied the rescue rope from the tree and checked the knot again. It was slick with mud, but it held. I wrapped one end around my waist, looped the other under Rook's tiny chest to steady him just in case the mud gave way again. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of nature itself. I was afraid of how far I'd go for a creature this small, afraid of how much it already meant. I stepped forward once and the mud swallowed me up to the knees. It clung tight, heavy as lead. Every time I tried to lift a foot, it pulled me deeper an inch at a time. That feeling, cold, suffocating thick, was like being pulled into a dream where the earth itself wanted to consume me. "Damn it," I muttered, my breath clouding in the frigid air. I forced myself to move inch by inch. Ahead, Rook's breathing came in ragged gasps, his head tilted weakly to one side. He was fading fast. Every lesson from 27 years in the field screamed inside my head, "Never go into the mud alone." But reason means nothing when you can hear a life slipping away right in front of you. I leaned forward, one hand gripping the plank, the other reaching out. The space between us couldn't have been more than a few inches, yet it felt like a canyon. The board beneath my feet creaked a deep, warning crack. "Hold on, I'm coming." I said it out loud, maybe more to myself than to him. Every move was a negotiation with fate. Every shift in the mud was a warning I chose to ignore. I reached for his neck. His fur was caked in filth, freezing cold beneath my fingers. I squeezed lightly, felt the faint, fragile thump of a heartbeat. He was still alive, and for now that was enough. I pulled. The muscles in my shoulders and back went taut as cables. The mud resisted heavier than anything I'd ever fought. My teeth clenched, my wrists shook. "Don't quit. You hear me? Don't you quit on me now." I yanked again. The mud gurgled a low, living sound, then suddenly loosened. Rook's lower half jerked free like something had pushed him from below. He coughed hard, gasping for air, eyes wide and wild. A thin, trembling breath escaped his nose, the sound of life clawing its way back. I was shaking all over, gasping, but as I tried to step back, my foot slipped. The mud seized me in one violent pull. In an instant, I was falling. The plank splintered. "No," I shouted right before the world went dark, brown, and cold. Half my body plunged into the pit. The shock of it stole my breath. The mud closed around me thick and merciless, pressing against my chest until I could barely move. I thrashed, but every motion dragged me lower. I thought of all the rescues I'd done, people buried in snow, trapped in floods, and realized that now I was one of them. No one was coming. No one even knew where I was. Rook barked a raw, hoarse sound, but loud enough to cut through the silence. He was crawling toward me, his tiny paws scraping the mud, making no progress but refusing to stop. A flash of a memory hit me, my wife's hand that day, under the rocks gripping mine. And how I let go, not today. I roared, gathering every ounce of strength left, and heaved on the rope around my waist. It tightened across my gut, slicing into me, burning with pain. But then I felt a counterforce. The rope held. My body lurched upward, breaking the surface in a burst of mud and breath and disbelief. Rook was still in my arms. We tumbled onto the edge of the pit, gasping for air. The ground was cold, the air thick with fog. I rolled onto my side, one arm wrapped around Rook, the rescue rope slung across my chest, a mark of the stupidest, bravest thing I'd ever done. "See, kid," I panted, voice shaking. "We're both out of our damn minds." Rook stirred faintly. A weak breath escaped his throat. He was alive, and for some reason, so was I. I sat up, trembling, and wiped the mud from his face with my sleeve. His brown eyes fluttered open, meeting mine the same look again. Trust. A look that hurt like hell, but reminded me I still had a purpose left in this world. "It's all right," I whispered. "It's all right, Rook. I'm getting you out of here." In that silent forest where only the wind and our shallow breaths remained, 2 lives, 1 man, 1 dog had chosen the same reckless path. The dangerous one. But the only one that led back to life. I sat on the wet ground, mud streaked across my face, breathing as if I'd just swum against a flood. My whole body was so cold I couldn't feel the tips of my fingers anymore. But in my arms, Rook was still breathing. Uneven, weak, but breathing. His tiny body trembled in small, uneven bursts, so faint that I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't held him against my chest. I pulled off my jacket, wrapped him tightly, and held him close. There's nothing warmer than human heat in a frozen forest. "Listen, kid," I whispered, my breath breaking in the wind. "Don't you dare leave me now. We've come too far." A strong gust swept through, scattering leaves and water droplets. Then the woods fell silent again, like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting to see how this would end. I gently laid Rook down on the damp grass. His head tilted to the side, eyes closed, body limp. I pressed my hand to his tiny chest. No pulse. I froze. I pressed twice lightly. Nothing. "No. Don't do this." I laced my fingers together and began chest compressions. Once. Twice. 3 times. I breathed into his muzzle, then pushed again, rhythm after rhythm, my own heartbeat stuttering with every motion. Cold air rose from the mud, mixing with the hot breath from my lungs, a strange collision of death and life. "Come on, Rook. You're not leaving me. Not again." A flash. My wife's hand slipping from mine under the landslide. That memory hit like a hammer to the chest. I pressed harder, deeper. My arms shook, but I didn't stop. "Not again. You hear me? Never again." I shouted it. The forest threw my voice back at me, hollow and desperate. 1, 2, 3. Then came a sound, a small raspy cough. Rook jerked, spewing mud from his nose and mouth. I leaned over, lifting his head, running a hand down his throat. A faint breath. Then a whimper. I froze. His brown eyes cracked open, wet, trembling. He looked at me, not understanding, not speaking, but knowing. And I, the man who'd thought his heart had long gone numb, felt heat rise behind my eyes and my throat close tight. Good boy," I whispered. "You did it." I pressed my palm to his chest again, feeling the heartbeat return weak but steady. I didn't even realize my tears had fallen onto his fur. A shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, glinting off the muddy water around us. The droplets shimmered like tiny shards of glass, scattered around his small body. In that moment, I thought maybe nature still had room for miracles. I looked up. The forest was still quiet, but no longer felt hostile. I heard the wind slip softly through the treetops, gentle, thin, like a sigh. Rook curled up, slightly shivering, letting out a soft moan. I reached into my pack and pulled out a survival blanket, a thin, silver sheet we used for hypothermia in the wild. I wrapped him tight, wiping the mud from his nose. When I laid my hand on his forehead, he licked the tip of my finger, weakly trembling, but enough to almost make me break. "Yeah, I know," I murmured. "I'm cold, too." I held him tighter. The warmth of two lives, man and dog, mingled together enough to push back the chill closing in. The sun began to rise over the ridge. Light spilled through the fog, glancing off the pit, where death had just been turned away. It fell over me, over Rook, over what was left of the long night. I looked down and whispered, "You know, Rook, they say people rescue animals, but sometimes it's you who rescue us from ourselves." He didn't answer, just sighed softly and pressed his head against my chest. His heartbeat matched mine, steady, fragile, perfectly in sync. I sat still, letting time drift. Listening as the forest woke up again, and I knew that no matter how cold the world outside could get right here in my arms, life had just been given one more chance. I wrapped Rook in the silver blanket and held him close against my chest. His body still trembled, light, fragile, like a leaf in the wind, but every breath he took felt like a small miracle. Each sound of his breathing was one more reason not to give up. A fine drizzle began to fall as I climbed into the truck. I turned on the heater, set Rook in my lap, one hand on the wheel, the other keeping the blanket tight around him. The dirt road out of the forest was slick with mud, cold and metallic like steel. I knew that one wrong slip of the tires and we'd both be stuck again in a place no one would ever find us. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Not because I was braver, but because for the first time in years, I had something to lose. The pines receded in the rearview mirror. Raindrops mixed with mud, streaking the windows like dried blood. Every bump made Rook whimper softly. I laid my hand over his head, my voice trembling. "Easy, kid. We're almost there." I drove nearly 40 minutes through fog and freezing rain. The storm had passed, but the cold still clawed at the air. When the yellow lights of the rescue station appeared through the haze, I almost laughed. I had never seen anything more beautiful. Grace was on the night shift. The door flew open the moment I honked. She looked at me, covered in mud, holding a small silver bundle, and didn't ask a single question. "Ethan, it's you again." "Yeah," I said, exhaling, but this time he's barely breathing. Grace gently took Rook from my arms and laid him on the heated table. The room glowed under soft white light. The IV machine began to tick, drip, 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 like a heartbeat slowly finding its rhythm again. She wiped the mud from his face with a warm towel, her hands steady but trembling just enough to show she cared. I stood beside her, afraid to even blink. A minute passed, then another, and then the small body twitched. A weak wheeze escaped his throat and his eyes fluttered open. Grace smiled and brushed her fingers gently over his ear. "Welcome back, little warrior." I smiled too without realizing it, the first real smile I'd felt in years. Rook stayed curled in the blanket, his breathing steadying with each passing second. I sank to the floor, back against the wall, feeling the blood still shaking in my hands. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin blade of light broke through the window, stretching across the metal table, and reflected softly on the tiny face sleeping soundly, a life returned from the edge. Grace looked at me, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the moment. "You know, Ethan, maybe that little boy isn't the only one who got saved tonight." I looked down, resting my hand over the blanket where Rook lay, and nodded. "I know." The next morning, I was still sitting on the floor of the rescue room, my back against the wall. My jacket was stiff with dried mud, and the skin on my hands had cracked from the cold. I couldn't remember if I'd slept at all. All I knew was that Rook was still breathing steady, soft reel. Grace came in holding a cup of hot coffee. She smiled when she saw me still there. "You didn't go home, did you know?" I said, my eyes never leaving Rook. I'm afraid if I close my eyes, he'll be gone. She sat beside me, her gaze gentle. You've been afraid of that before, haven't you? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. She understood. Morning light spilled through the window. Rook lay on the table, curled in his silver blanket. When the first beam touched his face, his tiny ears twitched. A faint whimper escaped him, and then his eyes opened, those brown eyes, clouded the night before, now clear beneath the rising sun. He looked around for a moment, then found me. Time stopped. No more beeping machines, no rain tapping on the roof, just those eyes and something wordless passing between us. He blinked once, then using all the strength he had lifted his head slightly toward me. Grace let out a quiet laugh. Looks like he knows who you are. I stood, legs shaking, and walked closer. I placed my hand on his head, brushing gently. His fur was dry now, warm again, soft as ash after a fire. Good morning, Rook. He breathed out slowly, then licked my finger, a small gesture. But to me it was the deepest thank you anyone could ever give. Grace checked a few readings, then glanced at me, her voice barely above a whisper. You know Ethan. He could have died 100 times on the way here. I know, I said quietly. So could I. She didn't ask. Ask more. Some things don't need to be explained, just understood. Rook settled down again, resting his head on my wrist. His tiny body was warm now, his breathing, even his eyes, closing in peace. I looked at him and realized that the thin morning light outside the window wasn't just lighting the room. It was reaching into the darkest part of me. I didn't pray. I just whispered to myself, thank you for coming back. Thank you for reminding me there's still something worth believing in. Rook didn't respond. But I know he understood, because right then, for just a second, his tail gave a faint, slow wag, a small sign, a silent promise, that both of us were going to keep living. 3 weeks passed. The snow began to melt, revealing damp soil and the first blades of spring grass. Bridger Teton grew brighter, warmer, and somehow less lonely. That morning, I drove back to the rescue station carrying a bag of dog food and some warm milk. Grace was standing on the porch, her smile half hidden behind a steaming mug of coffee. You came just in time, she said, her eyes lighting up. The little guy's been adopted. I stopped in the middle of the yard. Her words hit me with a strange mix of weight and release. Adopted, she nodded. A family from Jackson Hole. They've got a little boy. He lost his dog last year. They saw Rook's picture and said, if this dog is still alive, then he must be a miracle, and I want that miracle in my home. I didn't speak. Not out of sadness, just that quiet warmth that rises inside you like sunlight filtering through pine branches. Grace gave me a soft smile. Would you like to say goodbye? I nodded. When I stepped through the wooden door, there he was. Rook. He'd grown a bit, his black and tan coat sleek again, his eyes bright like amber. When he saw me, he jumped up, tail wagging wildly. The sound of his nails on the wooden floor rang like the happiest kind of music. I knelt down and opened my arms. He ran straight into them, warm, alive, real, his little body trembling with joy. Hey there, buddy, I whispered. You're looking good. He licked my hands, burying his head into my jacket as if trying to crawl inside it. I could feel his heartbeat, fast, strong, full of life. Grace stood by the door, smiling, eyes glistening. I think he remembers you, she said. I stroked Rook's head, my voice thick. No, I think he remembers what it feels like to trust someone. When the new family arrived, their son, about 7, with blonde hair and pale blue eyes, sat down beside Rook. He reached out a small hand. Rook sniffed it, then gently licked his fingers. The boy grinned, and the whole room seemed to fill with light. I stood there quietly, my heart trembling with something I hadn't felt in years. A creature once buried in mud, once brushing the edge of death, was now beginning a brand new chapter. And so was I, the man who had lived in the dark for 10 long years. When they drove away, Rook sat by the window, his eyes still watching me. The car turned the corner, but I stayed there until all that remained was the shimmer of sunlight reflecting off the glass. I turned to Grace. "You think he'll be okay? Better than you think, Ethan." I smiled, though my eyes burned. A soft wind moved through the grass, and somewhere deep inside, something unknotted, warm light, free. That afternoon, I drove back to the old pit. It was just a patch of green now, covered in wildflowers and new grass. I stood there in the fading light, listening to the stream in the distance and the wind whispering through the trees. I closed my eyes and heard Rook's breathing again. The sound etched into my memory. The faint whimpers from that day had become a song of life that would never fade. "Thank you, kid," I whispered. "Thank you for teaching me to believe in second chances." A shaft of sunlight touched my shoulder, soft, like the hand I'd lost long ago. And for the first time in 10 years, I felt truly at peace. I once thought I had saved Rook, but I hadn't. He had saved me from the darkness, from loss, from believing that kindness had no place left in this world. He showed me that sometimes all it takes is one reaching hand for a creature to live again, and for a heart thought long dead to remember how to love. And you ever saved a dog? If you have, tell that story. Let it be heard. Let it travel. So no dog ever has to tremble again alone in the cold rain, because somewhere out there another life might still be waiting for your hand. Choose kindness. Because sometimes a second chance begins with nothing more than a look and a heart that's willing to stop and care.